What if I told you that the French press sitting on your kitchen counter right now might literally be aging your cardiovascular system?
Yeah, or, that just the simple act of sitting on the edge of your bed to tie your shoes this morning is a direct predictor of your risk for a fatal fall.
Which is just wild to think about. I mean, welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are exploring a really dense stack of clinical research on metabolic health and longevity vitality. And the mission here is, well, it's to look at these things you do every single day.
Right, because it completely upends how we usually think about longevity.
Mm-hmm.
We always assume extending our health span takes these massive, sweeping lifestyle overhauls.
Like moving to a mountaintop or meditating for 6 hours a day.
Exactly, or some extreme caloric restriction.
Yeah.
But when you look closely at the underlying biology, longevity is actually far more mechanical. It's really about maintaining physical resilience, keeping your metabolic engine running, and preserving cognitive sharpness through very specific calculated tweaks.
Micro tweaks. That is the through line of all the sources we're looking at today. We are talking about incredibly targeted adjustments to your daily routine that yield exponential biological return.
They really do.
So as you listen today, I want you to mentally walk through your own morning routine. Because the very first protocol dictates the chemical foundation for your entire day, starting the literal second you brew your coffee.
Yeah, so this comes from Dr. Jeremy London, who is a board-certified cardiovascular surgeon.
Yeah.
And he points out this massive blind spot most of us have regarding that morning cup.
Right.
The clinical data suggests that if you are using a French press or, a standard metal espresso filter, you are actively working against your own lipid profile.
Wait, okay, I have to stop you there. Because I thought the consensus was that black coffee is generally fantastic for metabolic health, like because of the antioxidants. Why would the brewing vessel suddenly make it a hazard to our arteries?
It's a great question. The issue isn't the coffee itself. It's the oils contained within the bean. Specifically, there's a class of compounds called diterpenes.
Diterpenes, okay.
Right, and when you consume diterpenes, they go into your system and actively bind to the exact receptors in your liver that are responsible for clearing cholesterol from your blood.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they essentially block your body's natural cholesterol disposal mechanism. When you use a French press or a metal mesh, those oils just pass right through the filter and straight into your mug.
So the cholesterol just continues to circulate.
It circulates and it accumulates. The clinical data actually shows that consuming unfiltered coffee on a regular basis can increase your LDL cholesterol and your ApoB levels by up to 22%.
22% just from the coffee filter.
Exactly. And chronically elevated ApoB particles are the direct drivers of plaque buildup and fatal atherosclerosis. But the intervention here is incredibly simple. You just use a paper filter.
A paper filter. Okay, let's unpack this. So it's almost like, think of the paper coffee filter like a microscopic nightclub bouncer. Just standing at the edge of the funnel, physically grabbing the troublemaking oils and keeping them out of your bloodstream.
That is the perfect analogy. And there's actually a fascinating anecdote in the research from health podcaster Max Lugavere. He learned about this diterpene mechanism, swapped his daily French press for paper-filtered coffee, and just cracked his blood work.
And what happened?
His ApoB and LDL levels dropped dramatically, just from changing the physical material of his coffee filter.
That is the definition of a micro tweak. You don't have to give up the coffee. You just change the mechanics of how it's delivered to protect your endothelial lining.
Exactly. But, filtering out the bad compounds is really just step one. The research also points to a protocol for actively cultivating beneficial compounds first thing in the morning.
Right, the gut microbiome stuff.
Now,
This is from Dr. William Lai. He has this protocol for fertilizing the gut, and his recommendation is to drink polyphenol-rich liquids like pomegranate juice, Concord grape juice, or cranberry juice.
yeah.
But honestly, when I read this, it completely threw me. Because fruit juice is basically a concentrated sugar bomb. Why would a longevity protocol ever recommend a massive glycemic spike?
Well, it's an excellent question. And the nuance here is entirely about the specific polyphenols and tannins found in those specific dark fruits. You aren't drinking it for the macronutrients, and you really only need a very small amount.
Okay, so it's not like a huge glass.
No, not at all. So normally, we consume prebiotics like fiber to directly feed our gut bacteria. But these specific polyphenols operate on a completely different mechanism. They don't actually feed the bacteria at all.
Wait, they don't?
No. Instead, they act as a signaling molecule to your own intestinal lining, prompting your goblet cells to secrete a thicker layer of mucus.
Okay, I have to be honest, that sounds slightly revolting, but I assume this extra mucus serves a critical purpose?
It does. It is literally the biological soil required for a highly beneficial, specific strain of bacteria called Akkermansia mucinifera.
Akkermansia.
Right. And this bacteria lives exclusively in that mucus layer. If you don't have the mucus, the bacteria cannot survive, no matter how quote-unquote healthy the rest of your diet is.
Wow, and Akkermansia is supposed to be incredibly important, right?
Oh, it's an absolute master regulator of human metabolism. People who are lean and highly insulin sensitive almost universally have an abundance of it, whereas individuals with severe metabolic syndrome often lack it completely. It actively puts out the smoldering fire of excess visceral fat and systemic inflammation.
There's actually that pretty astonishing case study in Dr. Lai's research on this. He was treating a cancer patient whose gut microbiome was completely eradicated by heavy antibiotics.
Yeah, that case is incredible.
She had zero Akkermansia left, which was a massive problem because that bacterial absence meant her immune system wouldn't respond to her upcoming immunotherapy treatment. But Dr. Lai didn't prescribe a probiotic. He prescribed pomegranate juice.
Right, to rebuild that mucosal soil.
And it worked beautifully. Within weeks, her Akkermansia levels rebounded to 6 times the average population level. By simply providing the environment for the bacteria to thrive, her immune system was primed, and she had a highly successful response to the cancer treatment.
Which is just phenomenal.
So, okay, we've essentially engineered the morning chemistry at this point. The paper filter protects the cardiovascular system from apoptosism, and the polyphenols lay the groundwork for optimal metabolic regulation in the gut.
Right.
But, optimizing your internal chemistry is only foundational. Because if the physical machinery wrapping that system, like your muscle and skeletal structure, starts wasting away, those clear arteries won't save you from frailty.
Exactly. And this brings up a really frustrating biological reality.
Yeah.
As we pass our 30s, our bodies actively resist building and maintaining muscle.
Right. Which brings us to Angelo Keely's research.
Yes, on a phenomenon known as anabolic resistance. See, when we're young, the process of protein synthesis is highly sensitive. You eat a standard protein source, and your body efficiently signals the mTOR pathway.
And mTOR is the cellular mechanism that triggers muscle growth and repair, right?
Exactly. But as we age, that signaling mechanism becomes severely blunted.
Wait, so you're telling me that standard protein, like eggs or whey, literally stops working as efficiently as we get older? Like, I could eat the exact same chicken breast I ate in my 20s, but my body just won't synthesize it into muscle tissue the same way.
Precisely. To activate the mTOR pathway in an aging body, you need a much higher concentration of a specific amino acid called leucine in your bloodstream. And you need it to hit the bloodstream rapidly.
Okay, so speed is a factor.
A huge factor. Standard proteins have to be digested and broken down over hours, so you never get that sharp, concentrated spike of leucine required to overcome the blunted signal. So Keely's protocol bypasses digestion entirely by using free-form essential amino acids, or EAAs, that are specifically enriched with extra leucine.
Ah, because they're free-form, they require zero digestion, they hit the bloodstream almost instantly.
Exactly. They essentially kick the door down on the mTOR pathway, forcing protein synthesis to occur despite the age-related resistance. And this is particularly crucial if you are attempting to lose weight.
Right, because caloric deficits are notorious for destroying muscle mass alongside fat.
Exactly. But if you flood the system with EAAs, you create an aggressive muscle-sparing environment without adding the digestive burden or the massive calories of whole food protein.
The numbers in the research are actually staggering. There's a Department of Defense study where soldiers were subjected to a 40% caloric deficit, which is immense. But because they were supplemented heavily with EAAs, they maintained 100% of their muscle mass.
Which is almost unheard of in that steep of a deficit.
And Keely himself ran a protocol. He cut 500 calories a day for 6 months, but took 45 grams of EAAs. He lost 25 pounds, and 23 of those pounds were pure body fat. He only lost 2 pounds of muscle.
Yeah, and preserving that skeletal muscle isn't just about aesthetics, it is a primary driver of health span. Skeletal muscle is your body's largest sink for glucose disposal. It prevents insulin resistance, and it's basically your physical armor against frailty.
But having the muscle mass is really only half the equation. If you have the raw muscle, but you lose the neurological capability to actually fire those fibers to keep yourself upright, you're still at extreme risk.
Very true.
And that bridges perfectly to this diagnostic protocol from physical therapist Jeff Cavaliere. And I want you, the listener, to actually try this tomorrow morning. It's called the Old Man Test.
Yes, I love this one.
When you put your socks and shoes on, you must do it while standing entirely on one foot. No leaning against the wall, no sitting on the edge of the bed.
It is incredibly revealing because it demands a massive amount of systemic coordination. As we age, we naturally lose power in our distal muscles, so our feet and calves, as well as the deep pelvic stabilizers like the gluteus medius.
Okay.
When you force your body to balance dynamically on a single leg while changing your center of gravity to reach your foot, you are demanding intense proprioception from your nervous system. You are forcing the brain to communicate rapidly with the ankle and the core to stabilize the entire spine.
And Cavalier points out that sitting down on the bed to tie your shoes is an example of the body, quote, seeking easy.
Right. Seeking easy.
You offload the work of stabilization to the mattress. But seeking easy accelerates atrophy. If you stop demanding that your nervous system fire those tiny stabilizing muscles, the neurological connection just weakens over time.
And the medical data backing up the importance of this is honestly sobering.
Yeah.
An inability to balance on one leg for 10 seconds is one of the strongest clinical predictors that an individual will experience a severe, life-altering fall within the next 12 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And a hip fracture after the age of 70 carries a devastating 30% mortality rate within 1 year.
A 30% mortality rate. The stakes of simply maintaining the neurological wiring to your feet are quite literally life and death.
They really are.
Which brings us to the next critical layer of the research. If single-leg balance requires the brain and body to communicate to prevent a fall, how do we push that neurological wiring even further to protect the brain itself from cognitive decline?
Well, by stacking demands. The sources detail a protocol from occupational therapist Sue Paul called dual tasking. Sometimes it's referred to as exergaming.
Exergaming, right?
Yeah. We know cardiovascular exercise increases blood flow to the brain. But dual tasking takes it a step further by forcing the brain to manage complex, entirely unrelated cognitive tasks while under physical stress.
Right, so instead of just jogging on a treadmill while zoning out to a playlist, you are balancing on an unstable surface while actively analyzing a complex lecture or navigating a climbing wall where every handhold is a spatial puzzle.
Exactly. And the mechanism here is neuroplasticity. When you force the brain to split its processing power between maintaining physical equilibrium and solving a cognitive problem, it's forced to build brand new neural pathways to handle that novel load.
Building the hardware.
Right. This builds what neuroscientists call cognitive reserve. It acts as a dense protective network that buffers the brain against future neurodegenerative damage.
There's an amazing case study in the sources regarding the Connections Brain Health Program, which integrated this specific type of dual tasking. Within just 1 year, 44% of the participants who had been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment literally tested back into the normal, healthy cognitive range.
44% is a huge clinical outcome.
They highlighted 2 residents in their 80s, Dennis and Caesar, who regularly scale a 22-foot indoor rock climbing wall. They are literally forcing their aging brains to route complex spatial problems through their nervous system in real time.
And it directly addresses the leading cause of falls in older populations, which often occurs simply because an individual is trying to walk while actively thinking or having a conversation.
Their brain can no longer handle the dual task, and the physical motor control just drops out.
Exactly.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. We can actively train the brain to build new pathways to protect us. But the research also highlights a terrifying scenario where that protective neuroplasticity turns against us. Sometimes the brain builds incredibly strong pathways that send out catastrophic false alarms to the body. Which brings us to Dr. Howard Schubner's work on pain reprocessing therapy, or PRT.
This is a profound paradigm shift in our understanding of chronic suffering. The foundational concept of PRT is that the brain acts as an ultimate survival mechanism. It's like a biological smoke alarm.
A smoke alarm.
Right. It can and will generate severe physical pain to force you to change your behavior if it perceives a threat. Even if that threat is entirely emotional, like deep-seated guilt, chronic stress, or just feeling trapped in a situation.
Okay, wait, I want to pause and push back on this a little bit, because it sounds incredibly dismissive to someone suffering from a condition like chronic back pain. Are we saying the pain is all in their head? Like, are these sources implying it's just a psychological illusion and they just need to get over it?
No, absolutely not. And that distinction is paramount. We have to be very clear. The physical pain is 100% real. The neurochemical suffering is absolutely real. What PRT identifies is that the source of the pain is not structural tissue damage. It's a neuroplastic misfiring. The brain has myelinated the wrong pathways, wiring itself to fire intense pain signals in response to ordinary stress. The smoke alarm is shrieking, but there's no actual fire in the spine.
I see.
PRT teaches patients to cognitively reevaluate those pain signals, consciously categorizing them as a harmless sensation generated by a fearful nervous system, rather than a sign of a broken body.
Okay, that makes sense. And there's a clinical anecdote in the research that perfectly illustrates this misfiring. There was a man who had suffered from excruciating back and leg pain for 25 years, essentially living his life in a recliner.
Yeah, 25 years.
And one afternoon, he walks into a pharmacy, sees a massive line, and before he even takes a single step to stand in it, his pain spikes from a 5 to a 9 out of 10.
Which confirms the exact mechanism we're talking about. His lumbar spine hadn't borne any additional mechanical load yet. The sheer anticipation, just the emotional threat of having to stand in that line, was enough to trigger the brain's neuroplastic alarm system to generate the pain.
And once he recognized that his brain was manufacturing the pain out of anticipation, he began a practice of actively telling his nervous system out loud that he was physically safe. Within 6 weeks, 25 years of debilitating chronic pain vanished.
It's incredible.
And the clinical data supports this on a massive scale. There was a landmark study published in JAMA Psychiatry demonstrating that PRT cured 66% of patients suffering from chronic back pain, completely eradicating that chronic fight-or-flight loop.
It is remarkably effective because it stops the brain from dumping inflammatory stress chemicals into the system. But, that introduces the next physiological hurdle.
Which is?
Well, for the nervous system to maintain those clear pathways and avoid false alarms, the cellular environment itself has to be clean. The cells need abundant energy to function, and that energy production gets severely bottlenecked if the body is bogged down by physical toxins and chemical stress.
Taking out the biological trash.
Exactly.
This is where Dr. John Gildea comes in. He's a molecular biologist who focuses on physical toxins, specifically the microplastics we are constantly inhaling and ingesting, which act as endocrine disruptors and cause severe neurological fog.
Yes, they're everywhere now.
His protocol for clearing them relies on a highly concentrated sulforaphane supplement, which is extracted from broccoli sprouts.
Right. And sulforaphane is a very potent molecular trigger. When it enters your cells, it specifically activates what's called the NRF2 pathway. You can think of NRF2 as the master switch for your body's intrinsic detoxification system.
Okay.
When activated, it commands the cells to upregulate their defense mechanisms, triggering this fascinating physiological process known as lysosomal dumping.
Lysosomal dumping. Okay, I need to know exactly how that works because it sounds like a cellular waste management plan.
That is precisely what it is. The lysosomes inside your cells act like tiny garbage disposals. They trap foreign invaders and toxins, including microplastics. When the NRF2 pathway is activated by sulforaphane, it forces these lysosomes to migrate to the edge of the cell membrane and literally spit the trapped microplastics out into the extracellular fluid.
Wow.
Yeah, and from there, the lymphatic system sweeps them into the digestive tract to be excreted.
The clinical validation for this is wild. Researcher John Boothwig took this exact sulforaphane protocol, tracked his physiological waste, and recorded the highest microplastic excretion score ever seen by the testing facility. He actively forced his cells to dump the plastic.
It's a huge breakthrough.
But, as you mentioned, physical toxins are really only half the waste management equation. The other half is the chemical waste left behind by our daily stress, primarily cortisol.
Yes. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, unflushed cortisol basically hardens into disease-causing inflammation. Clearing it requires a mechanical intervention, which brings us to Dr. Julia Hafter's protocol, 5 minutes of light rebounding, or jumping on a mini-trampoline.
A trampoline?
Yeah. To understand why this works, you have to look at the anatomy of the lymphatic system, which is the network responsible for clearing these stress hormones from your tissues.
Which is very different from our circulatory system, right? Because the heart physically pumps our blood, but the lymphatic system doesn't have a central pump.
Exactly. It has millions of one-way valves, but no central engine. It relies entirely on the physical contraction of your muscles and the forces of gravity to move fluid.
So the lymphatic system is basically a city sewer system with zero gravity. If you don't physically shake it up, the waste just sits there and rots.
That's a great way to visualize it. If you are sedentary and highly stressed, the cortisol just sits in the tissues. Over time, chronic cortisol exposure actively degrades your fascia, the connective tissue that wraps your musculature. This is the biological mechanism behind how emotional trauma and chronic anxiety literally get stored in the body as rigid physical tension.
So gentle vertical bouncing on a trampoline acts as an external mechanical pump.
Exactly.
The continuous acceleration and deceleration force those one-way valves to open and close, rapidly flushing the stagnant cortisol out of the fascia while simultaneously triggering the release of dopamine.
Right. And Dr. Hafner actually shared a personal anecdote where she was caught in a furious, ruminating thought loop after an argument with her husband. She recognized the cortisol spike, jumped on her rebounder for 5 minutes, and the psychological anger just evaporated because she physically cleared the chemical driving it.
It is a profound realization that sometimes you cannot think your way out of a stress loop. You have to mechanically pump the chemistry out of your system. But, all of these protocols, filtering the APOB out of your coffee, feeding the Akkermansia in your gut, forcing the mTOR pathway with EAAs, passing the single leg balance test, dual tasking the brain, clearing the microplastics, bouncing the cortisol out of your fascia, all of it completely unravels if the metabolic cycle doesn't effectively close at the end of the day.
Without a doubt. Sleep is the ultimate biological anchor.
It's the period where all cellular repair and memory consolidation occurs. And sleep scientist Dr. Matthew Walker highlights one of the most insidious threats to this foundation, a behavioral phenomenon called revenge bedtime procrastination.
Yeah, this one is so common.
So what does this all mean? Well, this is the one that hits closest to home for me. It's 11:30 p.m. You are exhausted. You know your alarm is going off in 6 hours, and yet you are just lying there doom scrolling. It feels like self-sabotage.
It feels like a failure of willpower. But Walker's research explains it as a highly predictable biological cascade. It's driven by two factors: a lack of autonomy during your waking hours and a concept called ego depletion.
Ego depletion.
Yeah, it's the total draining of your self-control reserves. If you spend your entire day suppressing your own desires to manage a stressful job, handle family demands, and navigate traffic, your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for discipline, is chemically exhausted by the evening.
You literally have zero biological battery left to make the disciplined choice to go to sleep.
Exactly.
And because you had no time for yourself during the day, your brain views those late-night hours on the phone as the only territory it actually owns. You are taking revenge on your own schedule.
Precisely. Recognizing that this is a state of physiological depletion, not a moral failing, is the first step. You cannot rely on willpower at midnight.
Because it's already gone.
Right. So Walker's intervention relies on a psychological tool called an implementation intention, or an if-then plan. You preload the decision during the day when your prefrontal cortex is still active.
So you establish a hard rule, like if it is 10:30 p.m. and I am holding my phone, then I will immediately walk into the kitchen, plug it into the wall, and go brush my teeth. You remove the necessity for decision-making in the moment.
You automate the behavior to protect the sleep window. Because eliminating that wobble in sleep regularity is the ultimate foundational protocol for longevity.
Is it really that impactful?
Oh, the data is staggering.
Mm-hmm.
A massive UK study analyzing 60,000 adults over 6 years found that simply eliminating the variance in your bedtime, so maintaining a highly consistent sleep schedule, drastically reduced the risk of dying from any cause compared to those with irregular sleep patterns, regardless of sleep duration.
That is wild. Well, we have covered incredible ground today. We've broken down how tiny calculated adjustments to your coffee filter, your juice selection, and your amino acid intake completely rewrite your morning chemistry. We've explored how balancing on one leg and dual tasking your brain preserves your neuromuscular hardware. And we've detailed how to actively flush physical plastics and chemical stress out of your cellular environment to prepare for automated, highly regular sleep.
It is a remarkable toolkit. It really empowers the individual. And, I'd like to leave you with one final paradigm shift to consider.
Let's hear it.
Notice a pattern here. When you look at the landscape of modern life, we have engineered our environment to constantly seek easy. We consume highly processed, pre-digested foods. We sit down on soft cushions to put on our shoes. We numb ourselves with mindless scrolling to avoid processing stress. And we take painkillers to silence every physical ache rather than investigating the neurological alarm.
We're constantly avoiding friction.
Exactly. But what if the very conveniences we've built to make life effortless are the exact mechanisms accelerating our decline? True longevity isn't going to be found in a magic pill. It is found in intentionally reintroducing tiny, calculated doses of physical and cognitive friction back into our daily lives.
Calculated friction. The secret to health span is refusing to seek easy. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into metabolic health and longevity. Tomorrow morning, when you go to put your shoes on, try the old man test. See if you can stand on one foot and maintain that neurological connection. We will catch you next time.